My name is Stephen, and the day my son banned me from his wedding was the same day he sent me a bill for $90,000 demanding I pay for the venue, the catering, and even a honeymoon in the Maldives. Imagine being erased from your child's life, but still expected to fund the performance. At first it felt like a punch straight to my chest, but what he didn't know was that his picture-perfect wedding was about to unravel thread by thread because of me. This isn't just a story about money. It's about respect, betrayal, and the price of love when it's treated like a contract. Before we begin, I'd like to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. The morning light in Charlotte crept in soft and gray, but what landed in my mailbox that day was anything but gentle. A thick envelope with my name scrawled across the front in my son's careful block. Letters sat heavy in my hands. For a moment, I let myself believe it might be a wedding invitation, a chance to stand among family again. 6 months of silence had a way of softening even a hard heart. But when I tore it open, hope died quick. Inside was not an invitation, it was a bill. $90,000 broken into neat categories: 58 for the Harborview estate, 22 for signature catering, 10 for a honeymoon in the Maldives. At the bottom in handwriting, I recognized from his boyhood science fair projects Evan had written, "Be grateful. I'm letting you help." That sentence hit harder than the numbers. Grateful I'd sold my pickup truck once to pay for his mother's surgery. I'd fallen behind on mortgage payments to keep him in school at Duke. I'd shouldered every expense a father could shoulder, not because I expected thanks, but because that's what love demanded. Now my only son was reducing me to a faceless sponsor erased from the biggest day of his life, but expected to foot the bill. I set the papers down on the table, the weight of them echoing louder than any slam. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't touch it. Instead, my eyes wandered to the mantel where my father's old pocket watch ticked on steady as it always had. That sound carried me through nights of rocking Evan as a baby, through mornings when Laura was too sick to rise. Now it ticked on, indifferent to the fact that the boy who once called me the strongest dad in the world had banished me from his own wedding. The easy choice would have been to pick up the phone shout and demand an explanation. I knew exactly how that script would end, with Evan sighing, Melissa smirking in the background, and the line going dead. No, if I was going to respond, it wouldn't be in anger. Anger evaporates. Precision lingers. I stood at the sink and splashed water on my face. The cold sting woke me sharper than any cup of coffee could. When I looked back toward that thick envelope, I no longer saw it as a bill. I saw it as blueprints. Blueprints for dismantling an event that was more about spectacle than love. "All right, Evan," I murmured under my breath, the clock ticking behind me. "Let's see how grateful you feel when the bill comes due." I didn't yet know exactly how I would pull the thread, but I knew this: the wedding he thought would shine like a magazine cover would soon crack under the weight of its own vanity. And when it did, he would remember the man he tried to erase. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the papers still spread in front of me, like a bad hand of cards. My eyes kept circling back to that single word, grateful. It rattled around in my head like gravel in a tin can. Grateful to me had always meant sacrifice. It meant selling my old Chevy pickup when Laura's heart surgery wasn't fully covered by insurance. It meant skipping mortgage payments to keep Evan enrolled in his last semester at Duke, because I'd promised his mother I'd see him graduate no matter what. It meant wiring him money when Melissa decided their apartment needed a view, and the only way they could get it was if I picked up the difference. That was gratitude, me giving them taking, and me never asking for thanks. But this was something uglier. Gratitude had turned into entitlement, twisted into a command, written in ink I'd bought him years ago. It wasn't about help anymore. It was about erasure. He had erased me from his wedding day, yet expected my wallet to stand in my place. I looked past the envelope through the archway into the living room. The brass of my father's pocket watch caught the morning light. That watch had ticked through generations, my father's rough hands winding it after long shifts, then mine steadying myself through late nights with a crying child, through the slow decline of a wife who deserved better than the pain life handed her. That steady tick reminded me of the truth: life wasn't meant to be curated like Melissa's Instagram feed. It was built nail by nail, bolt by bolt, with sacrifices that never made headlines. I leaned back in my chair, my knees aching in the damp October air, and I let the memory wash over me. Evan, at 8 years old, standing knee-deep in Jacob's Creek sneakers, soaked through, grinning wide enough to show the gap in his teeth. A storm had rolled in sudden thunder, cracking in the distance. He ran to me, clutching his fishing rod, and said, "You're the strongest dad. That boy didn't need chandeliers or orchids or a honeymoon half a world away to know love." But the man he'd become, the man Melissa had shaped into a brand instead of a son, wanted me hidden away, so her tech executive friends wouldn't have to make small talk with a retired structural engineer in a suit more than a year old. My hands clenched tight around the edge of the table. I could feel the veins in my wrist pressing against the skin the way they used to when I was tightening bolts on a bridge beam. Back then, precision mattered. A mistake could send the whole structure down. This felt no different. I could have called him right, then demanded an apology, forced him to hear my anger. But anger was a blunt hammer. What I needed was a wrench, steady pressure applied at the right joints until the whole illusion cracked. So I slid the papers back into the envelope, tucked it beneath that pocket watch on the mantel, and whispered to myself, "Grateful you'll learn what grateful really means when you realize you can't buy it." The next morning, I rose before dawn out of habit. Years of working construction sites had carved that rhythm into me long after retirement. The house was still the clock on the mantel, ticking like a faithful old friend. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the counter, and opened the envelope again. But this time I didn't read it as a father bruised by betrayal. I read it as an engineer studying blueprints. Halfway down the itemized list, something caught my eye. Beneath the neat columns of figures and names of vendors, there it was: primary contact, Stephen Hale. My name. Not Evan's, not Melissa's. Mine. I stared at it for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. My son hadn't just sent me the bill. He'd tied me directly into the structure of this wedding. Vendors wouldn't call him first. When things went wrong, they'd call me. That meant I had control over approvals, over payments, over the very skeleton of the event. As if on cue, the phone rang. The landline, not my cell. That old bell tone rattled through the quiet house. I picked it up. "Mr. Hale, this is Jonathan from Signature Catering. We're finalizing details for the Hale-Whitmore wedding. Just wanted to confirm your payment schedule since you're listed as the primary." I let the silence linger a heartbeat too long before answering. "I see." It was confirmation enough. Evan hadn't just asked me to pay, he had assumed it, written me into the machinery, as though I were nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. That was his mistake. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and studied the envelope again. My pulse had steadied, not out of calm, but out of focus. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about leverage. He wanted me invisible at his wedding, fine. But I wasn't invisible to the people making the whole event possible. I turned on my laptop, the hinge groaning from neglect. Dust coated the keys. I hadn't touched it in weeks. The glow of the screen lit up the dim kitchen, as I typed the name of one vendor, I recognized Sapphire Bay Photography. Their glossy website opened with images of candlelit receptions and grand staircases, all curated for magazines and social feeds. But what mattered to me wasn't their pictures. It was their schedule. And right there, bold as brass, were the initials for an upcoming event, E+S, my son and Melissa. I closed the tab slowly, the chair creaking under my weight as I leaned back. My son had written me out of the celebration, but left me with the keys to the structure. And I knew better than most structures don't collapse because of noise. They collapse because of weak joints under pressure. I glanced at the mantel at the pocket watch, ticking on steady as ever. "All right, Evan," I said quietly. "You made me the point of contact. Let's see what happens when I make contact on my terms." That night, after pacing the house and listening to the steady tick of the pocket watch, I found myself staring at a blank page on my notepad. Structures don't fail all at once. They fail because of pressure points. And the first pressure point I needed wasn't a vendor or a venue, it was an ally. Someone who remembered Evan before Melissa curated him into a brand. Someone who could see angles I might miss. A name came to me like a beam sliding into place, Caleb Turner. He'd been Evan's best friend all through middle school, nearly a fixture at our dinner table. Laura used to joke that we had two sons, one by blood and one by friendship. Caleb had a photographer's eye, even back then, always pausing to notice cracks in baseball bats or the way sunlight fell across the old oak in our yard. The last I'd heard, he'd built a modest career in photography. I typed his name into the search bar. There it was, a small website, clean and plain. Wedding portraits, family shoots, nothing flashy but honest. At the bottom was a phone number. I hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of what I was about to set in motion, then dialed. Caleb Turner came, the voice deeper than I remembered, with a husk like life had sanded it down. "Caleb," I said. "It's Stephen Hale." A pause, then a soft intake of breath. "Stephen. I was just thinking about, well, never mind. How are you? I've been better." I admitted, the mantel clock ticking behind me. "But I need your help. Do you have a minute? For you always." So I told him. I told him about the envelope, the $90,000 bill, the insult of being erased, yet listed as the primary contact. I laid it out the way I used to lay out blueprints, each line precise, each joint defined. Caleb let out a low whistle when I finished. That tracks with the Evan I've bumped into lately. Different, sharper, not in a good way. "I don't want to scream at him," I said. "I want to teach him a lesson he won't forget, quiet, clean, and legal. And I need someone who can see what's happening on the ground." Caleb chuckled once the sound of recognition. "You still sound like the guy who double-checked the torque on every bolt in that treehouse we built." "That treehouse stood through 2 hurricanes," I replied. "Not by accident." He grew serious. "Tell me what you need." "I need eyes and ears. I need someone who knows how Harborview runs and how vendors like Sapphire Bay think. Someone who can give me photos, notes, proof when I need it." "I've shot Harborview before," he said after a moment. "Their manager runs it tighter than an airstrip. If the money isn't right, the show doesn't go on. And Sapphire Bay, they're obsessed with reflections. If something cracks, they panic." Exactly what I needed to hear. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "Broadleaf Coffee Park Road. 30 minutes. "Make it 40, Caleb replied. "I've got a call to place first." When I hung up, I felt it, the first turn of the wrench. Not enough to break anything, but enough to make the whole frame creak. Broadleaf coffee smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans the next morning, a place that always seemed to carry autumn in its walls. I arrived a few minutes early, the pocket watch in my coat pocket ticking steady against my chest. Caleb was already there, seated at a corner table with a black notebook open in front of him and his camera bag tucked neatly under his chair. When he looked up and spotted me, his face broke into a small smile, one that carried more loyalty than words could ever claim. He stood and hugged me, quick and firm. Caleb was never much of a hugger, but that gesture told me all I needed to know about where his heart lay. We sat across from each other, a window beside us, framing a row of maples just beginning to turn gold at the edges. So Caleb began leaning forward. "Where do you want the first crack?" "Not a crack," I corrected. "Just enough pressure to show what's brittle. If they want to build their lives on image, then image will be the first thing to fail." He chuckled and tapped his pen against the notebook. "You still talk like an engineer. So tell me, what are the weak joints here?" I slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. It was the vendor list from the bill Evan sent me. Signature Catering, Sapphire Bay Photography, Harbor View Estate, a florist, a linen company, even a string quartet. Caleb's brows rose as he scanned it. "They're going for spectacle," he said. "This isn't a wedding, it's a set." "Exactly," I replied. "And I know from years of work sets collapse faster than real structures." Caleb began scribbling notes. "Harborview has strict deposit policies. If payments don't clear, they pull the date. Sapphire Bay has a reputation to protect. They panic if negative press surfaces. Caterers juggle events, miss a wire transfer, and they reassign staff." He looked up at me. "It's all fragile. You don't have to swing a hammer, you just have to let gravity do its work." I nodded, feeling that rare satisfaction of knowing someone else saw the angles as clearly as I did. "I want to move carefully. No lies, no sabotage. Just precision. Pressure applied where the structure is weakest." Caleb's eyes softened. "You're not trying to ruin him, Stephen. You're trying to remind him who he is." Maybe, I admitted. But he won't learn it through lectures. He'll learn it when the glitter falls away, and he's left with what matters: family or nothing. Caleb closed his notebook, decisive. "All right. I'll dig into Harborview's schedule and Sapphire Bay's blind spots. You handle the vendors when they call. Let's see how long their perfect picture lasts." As we stood to leave, the barista's milk steamer hissed behind the counter, filling the air with a soft, white cloud. I breathed it in and thought of Laura humming in the kitchen on mornings just like this. For the first time since the envelope landed, I felt steady. The first domino had been placed. The rest, I knew, would fall in time. The following afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with the vendor list spread out like blueprints for a project I hadn't asked to build, but now intended to control. The mantel clock ticked behind me, its steady rhythm reminding me that patience wasn't the same as inaction. That envelope, the bill for $90,000, had been meant to corner me. Instead, it had handed me leverage. My son and Melissa thought I was invisible, yet my name appeared on every line that mattered. I wasn't just a bystander. I was the gatekeeper. I started with the planner. His name was Mark Mason, a man whose website was plastered with glossy spreads of picture-perfect couples and glowing testimonials about effortless events. Effortless, I thought, was just a word people used when someone else carried the weight. I dialed his number, and after a moment, a smooth baritone answered. "This is Mason. Good morning. Stephen Hale here. I'm listed as the primary contact for the Hale-Whitmore wedding at Harborview Estate." There was the faintest pause before his tone adjusted, careful now. "Ah, Mr. Hale. Yes, of course. We've been expecting your payment schedule." I almost smiled. "Then let me clarify something right now. I will not be attending the wedding. I was not invited. But my name has been placed on every contract, and that means nothing moves forward without my signature." Do you understand? The silence on the other end stretched thin before he cleared his throat. I wasn't aware of those circumstances. But rest assured, nothing proceeds without approval. Good, I said. Because if you treat a text from Evan as authorization or an email from Melissa as consent, you'll find yourself holding bills that won't be paid. Everything, every change, every add-on comes from me. In writing, his professional polish cracked just a little. Understood. I ended the call before he could wrap it in pleasantries. Setting the phone down, I exhaled slowly. One pressure point engaged. Mark Mason might still smile for the happy couple, but now he knew where the true fulcrum sat, and it wasn't in their hands. That evening, the phone rang again. This time it was Signature Catering. The manager, Jonathan, left a voicemail asking for confirmation of the payment schedule. I didn't call back immediately. I let the silence stretch for an hour, then two. When I finally returned his call, I kept my words clipped. Jonathan, this is Stephen Hale. Quick clarity, do not accept approvals from anyone but me. If you hear otherwise, assume it isn't true. Got it, Mr. Hale, he said without hesitation. We'll adjust our notes. When I hung up, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a bolt tightening into place. Not forced, not snapped, just firm enough to hold the weight. My son wanted me erased, but with every quiet call, every calm instruction, the structure of his wedding shifted back toward me. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was the spark. The moment he'd realized that no matter how carefully Melissa had staged their story, the foundation still rested on the man he thought he'd written out. The next morning, I drove to Broadleaf again. Caleb was already there, this time with a cup of black coffee and his camera bag at his feet. He greeted me with that same steady handshake, the kind men give when words won't quite cover history. We slid into the corner booth, the window beside us spilling soft October light across the table. You made the calls, Caleb said without preamble. I did, I replied. Mason knows I'm the only signature that matters. Catering does too. From here on out, if Evan or Melissa try to push something through, they'll hit a wall. Me. Caleb nodded, scribbling notes in his worn notebook. Good. That's your leverage. But leverage only works if the structure already has stress. Lucky for you, Harborview is built on timelines tighter than a drum. I leaned forward. Tell me. Harborview requires final insurance riders and generator confirmations by next Friday. Miss that, and your son's dream venue turns tentative. And guess what? They already have another event on soft hold for that same slot, a corporate reception with deep pockets. I smiled, slow and deliberate. So if Evan and Melissa stumble, the venue could flip to the other client. Exactly. And the best part, you don't have to lift a finger. Just don't sign. The thought sat heavy and satisfying, not because I wanted to destroy my son's day, but because for the first time I had control. If he wanted to erase me, he should have erased my name from the contracts too. Caleb flipped a page and tapped his pen. Then there's Sapphire Bay. They're not just photographers. They package weddings like brand launches. If they smell trouble, they overcorrect. Negative press terrifies them. One rumor of disorder and they'll scramble. And you can provide proof, I said, watching his eyes. Photos, notes, whatever you need. Quiet, clean, nothing illegal. I sat back, the old chair creaking under my weight, and felt the kind of calm that comes when a plan starts to take shape. This isn't about revenge, Caleb. It's about boundaries. My son thinks gratitude means writing a check without question. Melissa thinks family means props for her stage. They need to learn that neither is true. Caleb smiled faintly. You always did believe lessons were learned in the doing, not the telling. I thought of the treehouse we built years ago, nails crooked under Evan's small hands, me steadying the boards. That treehouse stood through hurricanes, not because I explained load paths, but because I showed him how to place weight where it belonged. This was no different. I'm not swinging a hammer here, I said. I'm just letting gravity work. Caleb closed his notebook with a firm snap. Then let's make sure gravity has the room it needs. As we left, the barista called out a cheerful goodbye. The world outside moved on, cars, passing leaves, drifting, life unfolding. No one knew that inside those quiet walls we'd just mapped out the first fractures of a wedding built more on image than love. And I promised myself, as the pocket watch ticked warm against my chest, that when the cracks spread, Evan would remember exactly who set the terms. That evening, the phone rang again. The caller ID flashed Harborview Estate. I let it ring twice before answering, just enough to remind whoever was on the other end that I wasn't desperate. Mr. Hale, this is Alyssa from Harborview. I'm confirming we haven't received your final insurance rider or payment authorization. Without it, the wedding date reverts to tentative by close of business Friday. Her voice was polite, but clipped the voice of someone who managed schedules, not sentiment. I understand, I said calmly. For the record, nothing is authorized unless it bears my signature. Not Evan's, not Melissa's, mine. Silence on her end, then a small shift in tone. So you're the true point of contact? I'm the only one, I replied. Noted. She didn't argue, didn't soften. She just acknowledged the fact like a professional. That was good. Facts were my language. After hanging up, I typed out a short email on my old consulting letterhead. The language was plain and firm. All approvals for the Hale Whitmore event require my written authorization. No exceptions. I accept no liability for charges not signed by me. I sent copies to Harborview Signature Catering in Sapphire Bay. Then I printed one and placed it beneath the pocket watch on the mantel, a visible reminder that control now sat squarely in my hands. The next day, Evan called. His voice was smooth, too smooth the way it got when Melissa was within earshot. Dad, he began, I heard you've been inserting yourself with vendors. You're confusing people. No, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm clarifying things. You listed me as primary contact. That means I'm responsible. And responsibility means boundaries. He sighed. Melissa and I have standards. Our friends don't need a show to understand love, I cut in. There was a pause, then a sharp edge in his voice. You should be grateful we're including you at all. That word again, grateful. It wasn't gratitude he wanted. It was compliance. Grateful, I said slowly, was selling my truck to cover your tuition. Grateful was taking a second mortgage for your mother's surgery. This is not gratitude. This is erasure with a bill attached. He went silent long enough for me to hear the faint murmur of Melissa's voice in the background. Then he tried again. Mark says we need the rider. Just sign it and stop making this harder than it has to be. Mark will get everything in writing from me, I said, or he'll get nothing. His frustration crackled down the line. Melissa's not going to like that. Then Melissa can call me herself, I answered. I'm retired but not idle. The silence stretched again, brittle this time. Finally, he hung up. I set the phone down, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Not triumphant, not wounded, just resolved. My son had expected me to disappear quietly. Instead, I'd drawn the first line he couldn't erase. And the look on Melissa's face when she realized I wasn't playing her script, that would be worth every second of patience. It was just past dusk when the doorbell rang. Not the sharp rap of a courier or the lazy knock of a neighbor. The doorbell pressed twice with the certainty of someone who assumed the door would open for them. I set down my coffee and opened it to find Melissa standing on the porch. Beige coat hair pinned just so the kind of presentation that looked curated even in fading light. "Stephen," she said smoothly, as if we were old friends. "We should talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in. Kitchen's fine." She walked in like the house belonged to her, her heels clicking on the tile. She didn't glance at the family photos, didn't bother with small talk. She went straight to the table and sat down, folding her hands in front of her like a CEO about to negotiate a deal. "I know you want to feel included," she began, voice warm but rehearsed. "But we're days away, and Mark needs certainty. Evan needs peace of mind. So say you'll sign what's necessary." Her eyes met mine, calm and confident. She was used to people bending when she applied just enough pressure. I leaned back in my chair, the mantel clock ticking behind me. "I'll sign for power, for heat, for food. I will not sign for a drone linens that cost more than a mortgage payment or a publication package designed to sell your wedding as a lifestyle brand." Her smile thinned sharp at the edges. "Stephen, this isn't about strangers. It's about our lives, our community, what we're building." "What you're building," I corrected, "is a show. And I don't fund shows. I fund structures that last." The words landed, and for the first time her polished calm wavered. She glanced at the mantel, at the clock, at the photo of Evan as a boy standing in Jacob's Creek, gap-toothed grin, wide fishing pole crooked. For a second I saw her recognize that she was sitting in a house built by years, not Instagram. Then she turned back, her jaw setting. "We're not moving the seating," she said flatly. "That's non-negotiable. Introducing that kind of tension now isn't worth it." "You've already introduced tension," I said, "by erasing me from the chart. You and Evan have the same 24 hours as the rest of us. What you manage within them is your choice." Her composure cracked for just a blink, then she straightened. "Mark says the rider is due by Friday. Please sign it tonight." "I'll sign it in the morning," I said. "I don't sign things at dusk." The line through her bent, the road she thought she controlled. She gathered herself, quickly rose and walked to the door. At the threshold she paused, her voice dropping into that polished blend of warning and pity. "People will think you couldn't afford it." I met her gaze. "Then they'll be mistaken. And if they aren't, I'll survive that too." Her heels clicked down the walk, sharp against the autumn quiet. I shut the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and stood for a long moment with my hand on the wood. The house was still unimpressed by her performance. And for the first time I realized neither Melissa's calm nor Evan's silence had the power to move me anymore. By Thursday morning, the phone buzzed before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. It was Jonathan from Signature Catering again, his voice clipped and efficient. "Mr. Hale, just checking without your confirmation today. We'll have to reassign part of our staff to a hospital gala on Saturday. We can't risk being undercovered." I let the pause stretch just long enough for him to hear that I wasn't flustered. "Jonathan, you'll get my confirmation when I've approved what's essential, not before. And you already know who to ignore if they try to tell you otherwise." "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "We're clear." I ended the call and sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still beneath the pocket watch on the mantel, my steady reminder. Each call confirmed it. Evan and Melissa had built a spectacle without understanding the bones. And when the glitter fell away, all that would be left were the beams I chose to sign for, or not. Before noon, an email from Mark Mason arrived with the subject line, "Urgent approvals needed." He'd attached a packet of documents, insurance rider generator, rental linens, upgrade publication package. At the bottom, in cheerful script, it read, "Please sign all to avoid rush fees." I printed the packet, spread the pages across the table, and began sorting. I made 3 columns on a legal pad: necessary, nice, noise, Into necessary went the insurance writer, kitchen staffing, and generator. Into nice went basic linens. Laura would have reminded me not everything pretty was a lie. Into noise went the drone, the publication package, the influencer features. Then I took a black pen and drew a line through the entire last column. When I finished, the page looked less like a wedding plan and more like an engineering diagram, simple, honest, functional. That afternoon, I called Caleb. "They're pushing rush fees," I told him. "Let them push," he replied. Vendors don't move on promises. They move on checks, and your checks only cover bones. He promised to swing by Harborview later that day to pick up their load-in schedule and confirm which corporate client was circling the same date. If Alyssa flips them to firm Melissa, and Evan will learn what tentative really means, he said. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the house. The heater clicked on, steady as breath. The mantel clock ticked like an old friend keeping score. The truth settled in me then. This wasn't just about punishing my son or humiliating Melissa. It was about finally teaching Evan that image collapses without substance, that gratitude isn't a demand, but a gift. By evening, the revised packet from Mark arrived. Per your direction, writer, generator, kitchen staffing only. Other items removed. Please sign writer by noon Friday. I set the writer under the pocket watch, uncapped my pen, and waited. I wouldn't sign tonight. Not at dusk. Tomorrow in daylight, with a steady hand, I'd choose exactly which bolts to tighten. And when I did, Evan would finally learn the difference between noise and structure. The morning of the Harborview scout visit broke gray and honest, the kind of light that doesn't flatter, just tells the truth. I dressed in an old suit, clean-pressed, nothing flashy, and slid my father's pocket watch into my coat pocket. Its familiar weight steadied me as I drove down the long gravel road toward the estate. Harborview looked the way wealth likes to look, effortless. The columns, the gravel graded to perfection, the wisteria trained across trellises. But I'd been an engineer too long to be fooled. Everything that looks effortless hides scaffolding, and scaffolding fails if you don't respect it. I parked under a ginkgo tree, shedding gold leaves like confetti, and walked toward the south lawn. Caleb was already there in disguise, baseball cap pulled low, clipboard in hand. To anyone else, he was a landscape consultant checking lantern placements. To me, he was eyes and ears. Through the terrace doors, I spotted them, Melissa in beige, her hair styled as though a magazine cover might be lurking nearby. Evan beside her, dressed in jeans and a jacket that tried to look casual but cost more than most people's rent. And two photographers from Sapphire Bay marking the ground with colored tape like generals preparing a battlefield. I stepped onto the gravel, and all four heads turned. Melissa's expression shifted in a single breath, relief that someone important had arrived, then horror that it was me. "Stephen," she said carefully, as if we were friends. Dad Evan added the word, landing crooked. "Good morning," I said, and turned to the photographers. "You must be Sapphire Bay, Scout Day one of them." A tall woman named Rhea extended her hand. "That's right. Just picking angles." "Angles are important," I replied, shaking her hand. "Always good to know where the light lies." Melissa's jaw tightened. "We'll need your signature on the insurance writer today, Stephen." Mark's nervous. "You'll have my signature on what I approve," I said evenly. "Today I'm here to watch." Evan shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders tight. The photographers busied themselves pretending not to notice the tension. Melissa tried again, her voice all honey. "This is a day for family. It reflects on all of us. Then it should include all of us," I answered, letting the words settle. Behind me, Caleb pushed his maintenance cart along the path, never glancing my way, but I caught the low whisper as he passed scout notes in your inbox. Corporate reception circling same date. If Harborview flips, half their power's gone. Good. Facts were allies. We moved as a group toward the terrace. Melissa floated beside the photographers, tossing out words like organic and timeless. Evan stared at the ground too long, the way a man does when he'd rather be anywhere else. At the top of the steps, Rhea positioned them for a photo, Melissa poised. Evan smiling with teeth, but not eyes. I stood back, hands in my pockets, watching the picture they'd tried to erase me from. And I knew then the cracks had already started. All I had to do was let gravity take its course. The terrace smelled faintly of cut grass and polished stone, the kind of fragrance that hides the sweat of groundskeepers who made it look so seamless. Rhea positioned Evan and Melissa like mannequins, fussing over the tilt of a chin, the drop of a shoulder. Melissa complied with practiced ease, glancing past the lens as though she were already imagining herself on the glossy page of some lifestyle blog. Evan, however, looked like a man wearing someone else's suit. His smile had the right number of teeth, but none of the right muscles. Perfect, Rhea chirped. Let's move to the south lawn. As the group shuffled forward, I kept a deliberate half-step behind my hands in my coat pockets. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to watch. Melissa slowed her pace, waiting until the others were just far enough ahead. She turned to me, her voice low but sharp. You're making this personal. Not yet, I said, my tone calm. When I do, you'll know. Her eyes narrowed, but she recovered quickly, pasting on another of her polished smiles before rejoining the photographers. Evan glanced back, once caught my gaze, then looked away. A tiny fracture. By the hedges, Caleb appeared again, pushing his cart like a man on payroll. Without breaking stride, he muttered, corporate AV team touring at 1. If Alyssa flips the hold, your son's window gets cut in half. I nodded almost imperceptibly. Half a window was plenty. The photographers set up another mock shot. We'll want candles along the rail, Rhea said. Generators are loud unless you pay for quiet. I remarked casually, more to the air than anyone in particular. Which you didn't. Melissa stiffened. Excuse me, quiet units cost extra, I said, shrugging. Maybe you'll like the hum on your vows. Her lips pressed together, pale. Evan's jaw clenched, and for just a second I saw the boy he'd been standing on the porch, with a fishing rod, uncertain, waiting for someone else to steady his grip. They returned to their choreography. Melissa tossed out phrases like aesthetic cohesion while the photographers scribbled notes. I hung back, letting the cracks widen on their own. When the scout wrapped up, Melissa circled back toward me, her beige coat catching the breeze. We'll need your signature today, Stephen, she said sweetly. Mark is pushing for final confirmation. You'll email me, I replied. I'll review. I'll sign what I approve. Her smile faltered for a breath. We already sent it twice. I read it twice, I said. I didn't approve it. Her eyes flashed and she turned sharply on her heel, hurrying after Evan. I stayed rooted on the terrace, watching them move away, like actors in a play they no longer believed in. The photographers packed up their gear, Caleb wheeled his cart toward the service entrance, and I stood alone with the lake glinting behind me. This wasn't about spectacle. This was about structure. And structure always reveals the truth when the load gets too heavy. That night, the house was quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock. I just finished my tea when the phone rang again. Evan's name lit the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, just enough to remind him that my time wasn't his to command. Dad, he said, his voice tight, almost brittle. You made a scene at Harborview today. I made an appearance, I corrected. There's a difference. You undermined us in front of the vendors. I defined terms in front of professionals, I said. That's leadership, not sabotage. I could hear him exhale sharply, the way he used to when he lost his cleats before soccer practice. We need the insurance rider. We need the generator. We need the kitchen staff confirmed. You're asking for a check, I cut in. And checks come with vocabulary. One of those words is no. There was a pause. Then the line sharpened. You're enjoying this. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, my face caught between shadow and lamplight. If I were enjoying it, I'd have brought popcorn to your scout. Silence. Then softer. Why are you doing this? I let the weight of his own question hang. Then I answered, steady and deliberate. Because you sent your father a bill like he was a wallet with shoes. Because you erased me from the chart of a life I built with your mother. Because Laura is gone and you're building a cathedral out of air. And because, son, you can't learn gravity from a textbook. He let out a half laugh, brittle and defensive. That doesn't even make sense. It will, I said, my tone low. Friday is the hinge. If you want lights, you'll have to learn to see in the dark first. He went quiet for 3 breaths. Then, in a voice older than he'd sounded all year, he said, Okay. Okay. I echoed and ended the call before he could soften it with Melissa's script. I set the phone down, leaned back in the chair, and listened to the house. The heater clicked on the pipes, shifted, the clock kept time. Then another memory surfaced, the treehouse again. Evan at 12, hammer too big for his hand nails crooked. After a few swings, he sat on the half-built floor and said, It's ours, right, Dad? No one else gets to say what we do with it. I'd smiled then. That's the point. Funny how he'd forgotten. Now standing alone in the same house, I realized that's what I was doing again. Reclaiming what was mine to say yes to, and what I had every right to refuse. The next day, when the courier dropped another glossy packet at my door, I didn't even open it right away. I set it on the mantel beneath the pocket watch, letting time weigh on it. Because Evan and Melissa hadn't realized it yet, but they were already off script. And I was the one holding the stage lights. The following afternoon brought another courier envelope, thick and glossy. Inside was a laminated seating chart, 12 tables in perfect ovals, each name scripted as though calligraphy could buy loyalty. Melissa's parents, their friends, donors, Evan's colleagues, everyone accounted for. Everyone except me. My name wasn't there. Not Dad, not Stephen, not even Mr. Hale, tucked by the fire exit. Erased as though I'd never existed. Clipped behind it were contracts, insurance rider, generator, vendor, linen upgrades, publication packages. And at the bottom, a single sheet titled, Sapphire Bay Preferred Media Feature. In small print, proposed exclusives pending sponsor alignment. The coffee on my table had gone cold, but bitterness was exactly the taste in my mouth. The landline rang. Mr. Hale, a bright voice, said, This is Kara from Harborview. Just confirming we freeze the floor plan by Thursday at 4. Do you have objections? Yes, I said. She hesitated. Would you like to submit changes or defer to the planner? I'll submit changes in writing. And Kara, mark every item in that packet as pending until you see my signature. Understood. Her tone softened a fraction. Professionals respect clarity. By evening, Melissa herself appeared at my door again. Her beige coat was still immaculate, but the sharpness in her eyes had grown. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside and sat at the kitchen table. Stephen, she began, her voice smooth but pressed thin, we're days away. We need certainty. Say you'll sign the rider and the vendor approvals, and this can all be simple. I set the packet on the table between us. I'll sign for power, heat, food, and insurance. Nothing else. Not the drone, not linens for Instagram, not a publication package. Her smile faltered. You're undermining the aesthetic. This is about honoring our lives, our community. This, I said, tapping the chart, is about erasing a father while billing him for the privilege. That isn't community. That's branding. She inhaled through her nose, steadying herself. Do you want the world thinking you couldn't afford your own son's wedding? They'll think what they like, I answered. But my son will know exactly what I did and didn't pay for. The polished calm cracked just for a moment. Then she stood, smoothing the front of her coat. We'll send the rider again. Please sign it tonight. I'll sign it in the morning, I said, my tone flat. I don't sign things at dusk. That line hit her harder than any argument could. Her heels clicked briskly down the walk, vanishing into the autumn dusk. I stayed at the table, the envelope spread open, the pocket watch ticking steady above it. Melissa had expected me to be another sponsor, faceless and compliant. Instead, I'd become the one obstacle she couldn't charm away, and deep down, she knew it. By Friday morning, the air outside had the crisp honesty of late October, the kind that makes every exhale visible. On my kitchen table lay 2 envelopes, one marked rider, signed, the other empty. The decision would be daylights, not dusks. I poured coffee, set the pocket watch beside the stack, and let the ticking keep me steady. At 9, my phone rang. Mark Mason's voice carried its usual silk, but thinner now. Stephen, appreciate the clarity. We've pared down the list per your direction. Just the essentials: rider, generator, kitchen staffing. Vendors are waiting for your confirmation. Good, I said. You'll have it in writing and nothing more. He hesitated, then ventured. Melissa insists the seating chart remain as is. Optics matter. Optics don't feed people, I replied, and they don't keep the lights on. By 10, Jonathan from Signature Catering called again. Mr. Hale, I'll be frank. If we don't have funds in place, we may have to reassign our primary team. The hospital gala is dangling bonuses. Do what you must, I said calmly. Take the job that's real. If my son's wedding collapses because he relied on promises instead of payment, that's a lesson, not a tragedy. The line went silent for a breath. Off the record, Jonathan said thank you. Clarity saves everyone time. After we hung up, I printed the rider, signed it, and stapled a plain addendum on my old consulting letterhead: funds authorized today are restricted to power, basic lighting, kitchen staffing, and insurance. No third-party media agreements, publication packages, or add-ons are included. This authorization presumes my presence and participation. If revoked, authorization is withdrawn. I slid it into the rider-signed envelope, left the other blank on the counter as a reminder. At noon, Evan called. His voice carried the strain of a man trying to keep 2 walls from leaning inward. Dad, Melissa says you signed the rider. Is that true? I did, I said. With conditions. A beat. She says you're tying your presence to it. I am. He exhaled sharply. That's complicated. No, I said. It's simple. You wanted me erased from the table but holding the purse. That ends today. My presence is presumed or the lights don't come on. Silence stretched across the line. Then softer: Melissa isn't going to like that. She doesn't have to, I said. But you do. Because you're the one who sent me the bill. Another pause. Then, in a voice that sounded almost like the boy I remembered, Evan said, Okay. Just that. One word. Not a surrender, not yet, but the first true crack in the facade he'd been clinging to. I ended the call and set the phone face down. The clock ticked, the house hummed, and I knew that Chapter 3 had closed with the balance shifted. For the first time since that cream-colored envelope had landed on my table, the structure of this wedding was resting on my terms. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cold that makes wood creak and windows tighten in their frames. I'd slept soundly, not because the storm had passed, but because I'd finally set the scaffolding. On the mantel, the pocket watch ticked alongside the signed rider stapled to my addendum like a hinge bolted into place. By mid-morning, the first ripple came. My phone buzzed with a call from Melissa at Harborview. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Mr. Hale, confirming receipt of your rider. Power and kitchen staffing are locked. Please note the corporate reception we mentioned is preparing to move into Saturday's slot if your team doesn't confirm decor by noon. Tentative status remains possible." "Leave it tentative," I said. "I'd rather the cracks show early." A pause, then a small note of approval in her tone. "Understood. We'll proceed accordingly." An hour later, the doorbell rang. Not a courier this time, Melissa. She stepped into the kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm, her coat the color of wet sand. She didn't sit. "You've created chaos," she said, her voice taut. "Vendors are calling non-stop. Mark is scrambling. Evan's exhausted. Is that what you wanted?" "What I wanted," I replied evenly, "was a wedding built on honesty, not invoices padded with spectacle." She dropped the folder onto the table, contracts spilling out like cards from a rigged deck. "These are essentials. The string quartet, the upgraded linens, the photography package, essentials." I interrupted, tapping the addendum. "Essentials are power, food, and insurance. The rest is embroidery." Her jaw tightened. "People will notice." "They should," I said. "It'll remind them this is a marriage, not a trade show." For the first time since this began, her Polish slipped. "You think you're teaching Evan a lesson? All you're doing is embarrassing him." I stood slowly, letting the chair legs scrape against the tile. Embarrassment fades. Regret lasts. My son won't thank me today. He might in 10 years when he realizes love is not for rent. Her hands clenched around the folder. "You're impossible." "No," I said, soft but firm. "I'm immovable. There's a difference." She stared at me for a moment, then turned sharply, heels striking the floor like hammers. The door shut behind her, with a hollow sound that echoed longer than it should have. I returned to the table, gathered the scattered contracts, and slid them into a drawer. Then I picked up my pen and added 3 new lines to my notepad essentials feed. Extras bleed. Presence is not negotiable. As the house settled around me, I realized Melissa wasn't wrong. I had created chaos. But chaos has a way of revealing what holds and what collapses. And come wedding day, Evan would finally see which was which. Sunday morning came with a sky the color of tin and a wind that rattled the gutters. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the phone rang again. Jonathan from Signature Catering didn't waste words. "Mr. Hale, unless we receive confirmation by end of day, we'll have to reassign staff. The hospital gala is dangling bonuses, and frankly, it's hard to keep a team motivated without firm payment." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence hang. "Then, take the job that's real, Jonathan. You have my approval for basics, but if my son can't fund the frills, don't make your people wait on promises." A long pause, then a low chuckle. "You know most parents cave at this point. They cover the gap and hope no one notices." "I'm not most parents," I said, "and I don't pay for noise." After we hung up, I walked to the mantel and wound the pocket watch. Each click of the spring was a reminder structure, first spectacle, second. By afternoon, Melissa appeared again, this time with Evan at her side. They didn't bother with pleasantries, just marched into my kitchen like a boardroom delegation. Dad Evan began, his voice thin but urgent. "The vendors are panicking. If you'd just sign the linen upgrade and the photography package, we could keep everything on schedule." Melissa added quickly, "It's not much. Just appearances, really. Without them, the wedding looks unfinished." I set my coffee down. Unfinished is better than unpaid. You wanted me erased from the guest list, Evan. And yet every vendor in Charlotte knows my name as the primary contact. Which is it, am I invisible or am I the backbone of this wedding? Evan swallowed his gaze, flicking toward Melissa. She spoke for him, her words sharp. This isn't about you, Stephen. This is about creating a day that reflects who we are. I leaned forward, my voice low. Then let the day reflect the truth. You've built a wedding on credit and image, and images collapse when the lights flicker. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Evan's shoulders slumped just slightly. Melissa looked away, her polish cracking for the briefest second. Finally, Evan muttered, "So what will you sign, Power?" "Food. Insurance," I said. "The things that keep people alive, not the things that make strangers clap." He nodded once as though the weight of those words landed deeper than he wanted to admit. Melissa gathered the folder, her movements clipped. "You'll regret this," she hissed softly. I stood, meeting her gaze. "No. I'll remember this. There's a difference." They left without another word, the door closing harder than necessary. I sat back down at the table, pen in hand, and wrote a new line on my notepad. Noise demands urgency. Bones endure patience. The storm outside pushed leaves across the lawn, scraping against the porch like restless fingers. And I thought the real storm hasn't even begun. Monday morning arrived with the smell of damp earth, a storm having passed overnight. I was at the table, pen in hand, when the landline rang with that old bell tone I never bothered to replace. Mr. Hale, the voice on the other end, said briskly, "Kara from Harborview Events. Just circling back without your signed authorization for decor and seating. The floor plan will be marked tentative by Thursday. We already have a corporate reception waiting to claim the slot." "Then mark it tentative," I said. "If their plan can't survive a question mark, it shouldn't exist." Her pause wasn't long, but I heard respect slip into her tone. "Understood. We'll proceed with caution." By noon, another call came, this one from Mark Mason himself. His voice carried less polish than usual, a hint of strain at the edges. "Stephen, we need to talk about the optics. Melissa is concerned that limiting approvals makes the event look bare. Guests expect certain details." "Guests expect food and light," I replied. "Anything else is garnish. Garnish won't save a meal when the kitchen goes dark." He tried to pivot, smooth it over. "If you just reconsider, Mark," I interrupted, steady as steel. "If you proceed without my written approval, you'll find your trucks turned away at the gate. Harborview has that in writing. Check your inbox." There was silence, then the tiniest exhale. "You've boxed us in," he admitted. "No," I said. "I've defined the walls. Whether you build inside them is your choice." That afternoon, Evan showed up at my house. No folder, no polished lines, just a man who looked like he hadn't slept. He stood in the doorway, hands jammed in his pockets. "Dad," he said quietly, "why are you making this so hard?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Hard isn't the same as honest. You sent me a bill, Evan. $90,000. Not a request, not a conversation. A bill. Did you really think I'd pay for a party I wasn't welcome to attend?" His jaw tightened. "Melissa said—" "This isn't about Melissa," I cut in. "This is about you, my son. The boy who once told me the treehouse was ours, that no one else got to decide. Somewhere along the way, you forgot. And I'm here to remind you." He shifted on his feet, shoulders sagging under a weight he'd finally stopped pretending wasn't there. "So what happens now?" I gestured toward the mantel where the pocket watch ticked steadily above the signed rider. "Now the wedding stands on what I fund. Power Food Insurance. Everything else either holds or falls on its own." Evan nodded slowly, a man caught between loyalty and fear. Melissa won't like it. She doesn't have to, I said. But you do. And one day you might thank me for it. He didn't answer, just looked at the watch, as though its steady tick might give him courage. Then he left, closing the door softer than he ever had before. By Tuesday morning, the cracks were no longer hairline, they were spreading like stress fractures through concrete. I'd barely finished breakfast when the phone rang again, this time Jonathan from Signature Catering. Mr. Hale, I need clarity. If funds don't land today, we're reallocating half the staff to another event. We can't hold 2 weddings in one weekend on speculation. Then reallocate, I said, steady as stone. I won't fault you for choosing work that's real over work that's imagined. He hesitated, then added, Your son doesn't understand how close he is to losing coverage. He will, I replied. That's how lessons work. Not an hour later, Melissa arrived unannounced, her heels clicking across my porch like gunfire. She strode into the kitchen without waiting to be asked, a crisp white folder in hand. Stephen, she began, her tone stretched thin. You've boxed us into a corner. Vendors are calling non-stop. Mark says Harborview may release the date. Do you want to be responsible for ruining your own son's wedding? I let her words hang before answering. No. I want to be responsible for teaching my son the difference between structure and spectacle. Between marriage and marketing. Her jaw tightened. You sound proud of yourself? No, I said softly. I sound steady. There's a difference. She slammed the folder onto the table. This is the final rider. If you don't sign, everything falls apart. I flipped the pages slowly, deliberately. Linen's drone footage, publication packages, all neatly reinserted. I pushed it back across the wood, then let it fall. Because I won't pay for applause. Her eyes flashed, the polish slipping. People will think you're cheap. I leaned forward, voice low and precise. People can think what they want. My son will know I paid for what mattered. Lights, food, safety, not one more inch of image. At that moment, Evan appeared in the doorway, his tie half knotted, his expression worn. Melissa, enough. She turned sharply. Evan, he cut her off, voice firmer than I'd heard in years. Dad's right. We've been treating this like a launch party. It's supposed to be a wedding. Melissa blinked, stunned. You can't mean that. I do, he said, his tone final. Cancel the extras. Keep the essentials. For a long second, the only sound was the mantel clock ticking between us. Melissa's hands trembled on the folder before she snatched it up, her heels cracking against the tile as she stormed out. Evan sank into the chair across from me, rubbing his temples. She's furious. She'll survive, I said. The real question is, will you? He looked up, his eyes tired but clear. Maybe. Maybe this is what I needed. I reached across the table, resting my hand on the wood between us. You'll thank me one day, not now, but one day. The clock ticked on steady, as a truth too strong to ignore. By Wednesday, the storm I'd been steering toward finally broke. Calls poured in before noon, florist, caterer, even the photographer, all circling back to confirm payments that Melissa and Evan had promised, but never secured. Each time I gave the same answer. Nothing moves without my signature. By the 5th call, the tone had shifted. They weren't just frustrated, they were recalibrating. At 2:00 p.m., Mark Mason himself appeared at my door. He looked less like a man selling dreams and more like one managing fallout. His navy suit was pressed, but the lines around his mouth betrayed fatigue. I let him sit at the kitchen table across from me. Stephen, he began carefully. I need to know where you stand. Vendors are restless. Melissa is panicked. Evan's caught in the middle. If this collapses, it won't just be a wedding. It'll be a very public embarrassment. I leaned back, folding my arms. Embarrassment fades. but a father funding his own erasure that lasts forever. I signed for power food and insurance. Everything else, let it fall. Mark rubbed his temples. You've left me no room. You have all the room you need, I countered. You just don't have the frills. Make the day stand on bones, not brass. That's your job. For the first time since this battle began, his shoulders slumped in something that looked like relief. You know, he admitted quietly, I started in this industry because I loved giving people their day. Somewhere along the way, I started selling pictures instead. Maybe this is the correction I needed. I didn't smile, but I nodded once. Then let's call it what it is, a wedding, not a launch party. Not long after he left, Evan showed up alone. No folder, no Melissa. Just my son looking older than he had a week ago. He stood in the doorway of my kitchen, eyes on the mantel where the pocket watch ticked steadily. She's furious, he said, voice low. But I told her, you're right. We don't need all of it. We just need a day that works. I gestured to the chair, and he sat heavily. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy from Jacob's Creek, the one who thought his father was the strongest man alive. Dad, he said quietly, thanks for holding the line. I didn't see it before, but I do now. The words landed with the weight of years. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I just reached for the notepad on the counter and wrote 3 words, presence presumed. Always. He read them, then nodded, his expression tight but resolute. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the oak, I wound the pocket watch again. Its click was steady, unyielding. For the first time since that cream-colored envelope arrived, I felt not anger, not vindication, but calm. The foundation had shifted. The facade was cracking. And for once, my son was beginning to see the structure beneath. In the end, the wedding didn't look like the glossy magazine spread Melissa had dreamed of. The drone never flew, the linens were ordinary, and the publication feature never saw the light of day. But the lights stayed on, the food was hot, and I sat at a table marked family, not at the head, not hidden at the back, but where I belonged. And for the first time in years, my son looked at me without calculation in his eyes. The truth is, weddings come and go. Photographs fade, music ends, but the lessons of love and respect endure. A marriage isn't built on applause or aesthetics. It's built on presence, on showing up for one another when the lights flicker and the crowd isn't watching. That was the lesson my son needed, and it was the line I refused to let him erase. So if you're a parent listening today, remember this: love isn't measured by how much money you pour into appearances. It's measured by the boundaries you set and the respect you demand in return. Have you ever faced a moment where family treated you like a wallet instead of a person? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If this story gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share. Love is not for rent, and respect should never come with a price tag. Thank you for listening.